All right, everyone. So thanks so much for joining today. My name is Toland, and I work in customer success at Hive. And I'm here with our CEO, John Furneaux, who will be our main presenter for this session today. He has over 10 years experience implementing collaboration tools and projects, first as a consultant at Capgemini, and later as head of global customer success at Hull.com. He then went on to build Hive to fill in the gaps that he saw in the project management tools on the market. So for those of you that don't know, Hive is a project management platform for teams that combines chat, project planning, and files onto one easy-to-use dashboard. And just a little housekeeping for the webinar. We'll be recording this session and we'll send it to you tomorrow. So if you don't catch something during the presentation, you will have the recording to go back to. And then if you have any questions during the session, please send them in the chat group, and then we'll review the questions at the end and kind of field them in that time period. So without further ado, I'll pass along the presentation to John.
Hey guys, so thank you very much indeed for joining us. Hopefully it'll be an interesting session for you all. We're going to focus today on 5 actionable tips for improving your creative workflow, things that we've seen over the years and things that we've seen with teams that work with Hive now. We're going to dig into, first off, why is this so difficult for creative teams, and then moving on to the solutions. And the most important thing here is that we come away with some actionable stuff. I've joined webinars in the past where it's all well and good, but you come away and you think, well, kind of what do I do about that? Hopefully we're going to come up with some really specific things that you can try in your team, that other creative teams are doing and have found effective. So let's kick off. Why is collaboration such a pain? So first thing is, we know that our email inboxes, our messages and messaging apps are absolutely overflowing with messages. And the reality is that we spend more time just dealing with that inbound stuff from other people rather than focusing on the work that we actually all love doing, whether that's doing creative stuff yourself or administering a great project. And obviously, that sense of overwhelmedness with the amount of things that are going on. And there's sometimes, it feels like there's no real sense of plan. And the irony is that quite often somewhere in the team, there's someone with bandwidth who could actually help, but it's almost impossible to figure out who that person is and to manage the tasks around the different folk. So, when we look at creative and the specific challenges around creative, a couple of things that have always stuck out for me that make it particularly difficult for you guys. First one is the iterations on the work. We might have version 7, version 14 of a piece of collateral. Second one is the timelines. We know there's that difference between, you might have a nicely structured 12-week thing you're working on, but then something comes in today. It needs to be done by 4 o'clock, and everyone has to sort of jump up and do that stuff. From creative in particular, there's the challenges around concentration and making sure that somebody has the time to think. Maybe they're doing some branding work or that kind of stuff, where you really do need time to get into the problem space, understand the user personas. And then lastly, the fact that across this process, there's so many stakeholders involved, from the creative people through to the managers of the process, and then obviously back to client. So what can we do to make this work out better? Well, first thing, and of course, we're not stupid. We know that you guys have good ways to do this right now, but let's look at some of the best-in-class stuff we've seen. So first off, most important thing, of course, is that planning phase. And, as this awesome picture shows, we all know that if we haven't set out a plan, it's impossible to manage well. And it's astonishing to me in how many organizations actually work is plunged into without actually having taken that time ahead of time to think about when things are going to happen, who's going to work on each piece of the work, and then have the team focused on those primary goals that relate to each person. So how do we make a good plan? That's obviously very vague. Let's get into some details. So first off, obviously, what are the overall goals, and what does success look like for this particular project? Down to the level of details of the milestones and deliverables. And one tip we'll be looking at there is how to use templates for that, right? So say I'm doing 10 projects and they have some stuff in common. How do I reuse the stuff that I know from the plan from the prior projects. Thirdly, how do we know who is doing what? So are we doing, how many mock-ups we're doing, how many iterations we're doing, what's in the bid, for example? And then to be able to see exactly when those things are meant to be dropping in terms of individual people, who's doing what, knowing exactly who on the team owns which part of the plan. So from what I said at the beginning, make sure we've got the plan, but do we really know among these 5 people exactly who owns which bit and when it is? So from point 2, we know when it is. Point 4, do we know who's doing it? And then lastly, of course, the buy-in of everybody, making sure that everybody knows what's going on. And there's no surprises halfway down when someone senior comes in and says, I didn't think we were going to do it like this. Hopefully there's some sort of nodding heads in your mind there. This is, standard stuff. And then, so just last piece, of course, is to make sure that this stuff is easy to do, right? All sounds good on paper, but if it's taking us 3 days to do it, it's a waste of everyone's time. So how do we do that quickly? So let's look at some of the tools we can use to do that, right? Now, some of these, of course, apply to Hive, but we know there's plenty of other tools on the market. Our interest is in running great projects. The tool is secondary to that. So in terms of creating a good plan, something that we particularly like for the longer plans is Gantt charts. Now, these put shivers up the spines of people who knew what these looked like maybe 10 years ago. There's the old days of Microsoft Project or sort of horrible PowerPoints with 1,000 arrows and stuff. But the truth is that in 2017, in the same way that tools like Facebook are for consumer tools, in the same way in business, these things have got a darn sight easier to use. So if you look at an example, sort of modern web Gantt chart now, it's actually really easy to lay out, here's all the steps we're going to do, here's when we're going to do them, and then even assigning who's doing which bit, all in the same place. And then, of course, once you finish doing that plan, it's clear for anybody to see, including the senior people, exactly what is happening, when it's happening, and to sort of export that out, for example, for senior management. Just to reiterate here, because obviously, I know I'm sort of speaking at you, the chat function in Zoom, please, 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 if I say something you disagree with or you want me to elaborate on or to move quickly or slowly, just hit that chat section, and I'm keeping an eye on stuff that comes back. So first point to make is that planning really is possible in a light and easy way now, including timings and who's doing what. Then the second bit is how you execute, right? Now, this all looks very waterfall, right? Those of us who've been around for a little bit of time will remember that once upon a time, everything was waterfall, and then the world moved towards Agile. Now, Agile is, originally started in software development, this idea of doing sort of like weekly or monthly sprints, but has increasingly been brought up by other organizations. And we've seen some fantastic successes on this, specifically in creative and in marketing, organizing things as iterations rather than as an endless plan that goes on for 6 months or whatever. So if we look at how Agile works, and forgive me for those of you who are already familiar, the whole point is we start off with our box of things that we want to do. We pick some items for a given sprint. That might be 1 week or 2 weeks or 4 weeks. And then we work through those. They move from sort of left to right across the process until they're completed. And then we review the sprint and say, we said we'd do these 10 things. We've done 8 of them, got stuck on 2, and repeat the process the week after. So to make this real for you guys, and not just from our perspective, I'd like to share a story of a specific team that we work with, Navigating Cancer, doing wonderful work, helping with long-term cancer care for organizations based out of the West Coast. And they took this transition. They went from planning out things months and months in advance to sprinting week on week on week. And you can read for yourself some of the thoughts that they had on what that transition was like. One of the key things that they found was painful was just reporting upwards as to what was being done. And now to have that really neat list of here's the things we did this week or this 2 weeks, to report those back up to executives was powerful for them. And they basically copied the methodology that they had seen from their engineering teams. Some specific for those guys, 2-week sprints is what they went for. So they were doing it every 2 weeks. And then the other thing is they thought it was very important to have 15-minute stand-up meetings. A big part of the Agile methodology is those quick check-ins. So for a lot of people, that's daily, just 15 minutes at the beginning to say, here's the 10 left for 2 weeks. here's who's doing them today, and here's what's moving on. Hopefully that makes sense. So for me, the takeaways were the 2-week sprints worked well for marketing, and the 15-minute daily check-ins. So let's think about, summarizing there is some of the items that they came back to us, and I gave you some of the specific times and numbers that they used on that. Hopefully that makes sense. So next bit, automation. So we hear about all this AI, we hear about driverless cars and whatever else. How does this apply to the workplace? How does it apply to things like the creative process? So what you can actually do is automate specific requests that come into the teams. We know that there's a huge amount of back and forth, especially if you're getting requests from other people in the business or external people. And sending email is, I'm sure there's some people that love it, but for the rest of us, it can be a bit of a nightmare. A million CCs. So what a lot of tools like Hive, platforms like Hive now do is allow you to make that a consistent request process, right? So let's imagine I'm working in Nike North American marketing, and we're delivering out brand assets to teams that need them. How do we get them in a structured way so they're not just emails? Well, forms, which are used by us and used by other tools as well, allow you to structure those repeatable requests that come in. So you are complete king or queen of this process, right? You get to set out exactly what it is that you want to know from the person requesting. And then when that guy comes in, it's got all the details on it, any attachments, it might be, what team is this for? What format do I need it in, et cetera, et cetera. And then when that comes in, rather than being one of them darn email threads, it's coming in as a job for your team to do that you can pass out to whoever the right person is. So again, to make this real, so it's not all sort of vague, let's look at a specific team. I'm sure many of us know Pinterest, wonderful business. And you can see across the top, that's how their sort of creative marketing used to look. So they had sort of like request forms on the net, and then they had Google Sheets to plan things out, emailing out to people, and then chatting about what they were doing. And that's a very common process, right? That's lots and lots of people do it that way. But in their new world, they're using these sort of modern tools to have the requests coming in on one form, automatically generating the list of actions that needs to be done to deliver that asset. That's getting pushed out to all the teams, and then they can work on it and talk about it right in that same platform. Hopefully that makes sense. So that's the sort of Pinterest story, and that's how we can automate things. So just to make sure that was clear, if you have your 5-step process that is reasonably consistent, attach on the workflow to it, and you can automatically be sending out all the jobs to people without those endless chains. So next piece is communication. How do we make sure that people can speak to each other in a sort of consistent way and avoid the nightmare of the inbox? One of the key things is avoiding that constant mind switching, right? There's been tons of research done about how long it takes to get back to a given task once you've been switched on to a different thing. Some researchers say it's as much as 25 minutes for you to be as productive on something once you've left and come back to it. So here's some tips and tricks that we have been that have been shared with us by teams. First one is blocking off time, making sure there's time specifically for actions where you don't touch it. And a lot of people use their own calendar for that. So put a 2-hour block in for specific things. Second one, and this is really pertinent to the modern tools, is we've got to get out of this long stream of conversations. It means you have to read absolutely everything to find the one thing that might relate to you. So we would super encourage you to thread conversations as much as possible. That might be using a model like Hive, where conversations are tied to the piece of work that they're on, or by finding a threaded tool, but make sure you're not just in that endless stream of consciousness. Third one is think carefully about notifications and think about what platforms you want you and your team to get them on. That might be mobile, might be desktop, might be email, might be in-app. Those are the things that are knocking your people's concentration away from the task. And then, we're still big fans of in-person and phone call, right? Often people need to be pushed to be encouraged to just pick up the phone to somebody, solve something quickly, and get away from that darn email thread that goes on forever. Hope that makes sense. That's 4 things that we think is good for people to think about. And then let's think about how to work on things in the past and then move them through into the future. And this is where a lot of people are missing all their data, right? So if you think about if something's trapped in email and trapped in that kind of thing, how do you ever look back and see how long something took, where it got stuck, who was working on it, how long it took, how many jobs you did last week, how many jobs you're going to do next week, resource planning for do we have enough people for 2 weeks' time? Are some of our people going to be actually not busy next week? Do we need to actually push pipeline through? And some of the metrics that we think have been super useful for this sort of plan, do, review cycle. First one is, can you currently see how many actions, tasks you did in the last week, in the last month? Are you busier now than you used to be or less busy? And can you show that to senior management? Second, can you see how many times it went backwards and forwards? Is it easy for you to say, look, we have a problem here, the briefs aren't good enough, we're doing 5 iterations on every piece of work? Third one would be, how long are these things taking? Like both in terms of hours or in terms of elapsed time over a week? Can we say confidently, these jobs are taking 6 hours a piece? That's, for example, they're not even profitable. We're spending 6 hours of creative time at $40 an hour. This doesn't work. The model doesn't work. And then the last bit, are we keeping to our plan on the sprints? And we would just push you to ask yourselves, can you even answer those questions? Not just do you sort of want to answer them, but do you even have the data where you can do that? And we would argue that much better to have the information to be able to answer those questions, both to senior people and to others on your team. So if we get the data from this process and we can see, for example, that we do the same thing the same way every time, how do we take advantage of that? How do we learn our lessons and do a better job next time round on that? Well, one of the ways is, we talked before about the automation. We've got to put work into processes, right? If we know that we do something basic the same way every time, we would super encourage you, lay out what those steps are and have them as something that's reusable. The example here is something as simple as a blog post. Imagine there's like 7 things you've got to do to get that blog post live. If you're always doing the same thing every time, why have the more senior person do that when you can lay out those steps and give it to somebody junior and be confident that it's the same way every time? So if we look at the stuff that we have talked through in the stuff today, I said I wanted to make sure that it was super actionable, and we'll be sort of opening the floor to any questions in a second to challenge us and also tell us about how we can do a better job on this next time. But the 5 things that if I was in your shoes, I would be curious to consider doing. First off, what does it look like to build a longer term project plan in this kind of timeline view where you can see exactly who's doing what, when they're doing it, and you can track progress against it? Second question is, have you thought about using Agile methodologies for your creative teams? So setting up, 1 week, in the Navigating Cancer example, a 2-week piece of work. What are we intending to do in these 2 weeks so we can review it and then do the next 2 weeks, the next 2 weeks? Third one would be, are we able to make these requests consistent so they come in the same way every time through some sort of forms? Communication, are people using the right medium? Are they using email at the right time, or chat at the right time, or face-to-face at the right time? And then lastly, have you thought about reviewing the whole month's productivity, reviewing the data on that, and seeing whether or not you're putting your efforts in the right places? So hopefully that gives you some food for thought. A lot of that stuff I know that you will already doing a fantastic job on. Hopefully there's 1 or 2 things that raise some ideas in your head. Just the last thing to note is, of course, we will be sending all this material to you guys, so you can take any next steps that are interesting on your side. So I have talked for way long enough. I'm going to mute myself for a moment and pass back to Tolan.
All right, so thank you so much for attending the webinar today. As discussed, we will be sending you a recording of the webinar by tomorrow. And as a special offer, if you're interested or piques your interest in Hive, we have a 10% discount we're offering to all the attendees when you use the discount code webinars, 10% off. All right, so thank you so much, John, for sharing everything today. And thank you everyone for attending. I hope you have a great rest of your day.